Hi, welcome to Exit Point. This is Laurent Fratt, and with me is Matt Blank, and today we're going to be speaking with Scotty Bob. Scotty Bob is quite the character in our crazy base jumping community, but he's also one of the most well-versed base jumpers out there. From slider down to terrain flying to tracking, you name it, and Scotty Bob's done it. Matt, tell the listeners, where are we going to take this conversation today?
We're going to take this conversation all over the map, and where we're going to start is Brazil, where Scotty Bob and his wife Julia are teaching one of the most sought-after base courses out there. We're going to want to know everything about this course, what they're doing, what the scenery is like, what Brazil is like, and then we're going to want to talk to them about progression. Not just the progression that's required of a skydiver wanting to get to wingsuit base jumping, but also Scotty Bob's personal progression from being, back in the day, a person that had his number on the BFL reserved to now being recommended by basically everybody out there as a premier base instructor.
Yeah, absolutely. He used to be that guy on the couch, the hobo base jumper, and now he owns a couch and he's going to be a dad. So diving into his own personal progression will be interesting. And besides that, what can students do to prepare to be, get the most out of day one with Base with the Bobs? Also, he's come a long way with communication. One of the most difficult things about base jumping is communicating with your friends about making bad decisions. And Scotty Bob has been quite vocal in the past about people doing stupid stuff.
Oh yeah, man. Interestingly enough, he's one of the few people that has said, hey man, if you do that, you're going to die. And then the person actually dies directly after that statement. And that's happened on multiple occasions to him. So we're going to have to get his perspective on the culture, his perspective on, bad decision making and communication. Absolutely. I also want to delve into where he thinks the sport is going and if he thinks it's trending in a, positive direction.
Yeah, we got a lot to cover with Scotty. So with that, let's welcome Scotty to the podcast. Scotty Bob, welcome to Exit Point.
How's it going?
Good. So basically the whole deal here and what we're trying to accomplish is, I don't know if you remember a few years back when we were doing the next level coaches course, and we all had tons of energy, and we were sitting down at the bar and we were like, how can we contribute? Like, every one of us has our own little skills and has our little, ways that we could support the community. And this is it. It's a little bit difficult to get everybody to sit down and write a book. So it's a little bit easier to get everybody to sit down and talk to us on the podcast. So here we are.
Hell yeah, man. It's 2021. Let's do this.
All right. So we've got some questions, and Matt's going to start off with one of the first ones. And here we go.
Yeah, I feel like I've got to say this one in kind of a marketing tone of voice. Scotty Bob, you've started one of the most exciting and sought-after courses being offered in our sport today. Give us a rundown on what you're offering and a taste of the jumps you're all executing.
You're too good at that, man.
No, but seriously, your course is gaining a lot of traction. Give us a rundown, dude. What's up?
Yeah, we're pretty stoked with it. It's been kind of a fruit of some labor over the last, I guess, half year now. I actually didn't quite believe Julia I'd seen a lot of Brazilian base jumpers that are really, really talented at slider up, and that's usually an indicator that they have objects that are pretty conducive to progression. So we went down there in January and kind of checked it out and kind of developed our course loosely based off of our January trip. And we've run 2 now, and we're about to head down for a 3rd. And really what the course is really trying to gauge around is try to give people an introduction to slider up and terminal base jumping. We do a little bit of first wingsuit base training as well.
Can you give us an idea of what the day-to-day looks like on your course?
Yeah, we start at probably the most forgiving slider up cliff that I've seen out there. That's not actually a cave. It pretty much is a cave. We're there for a day and a half. It's really kind of for people that have never put a slider on, never jumped off a cliff or really anything with a slider on their base rig. It's extremely forgiving. It's not the biggest cliff out there, It definitely falls into that kind of subterminal slider up world, but as overhung as it is, and as good as the landing area is, it really gives people a nice taste of what it feels like to not exit head high, to feel like a good delay past 3 seconds, and then to get a pilot shootout with good body orientation.
Nice.
We can get a lot of repetition at that place too, so it's really awesome.
Rewind a little bit for me, because I mean, I'm super attracted of coming to one of these courses too. Like, you know, I've got a few base jumps myself, but just going to Brazil with a local and someone who's been there a bunch sounds amazing. Like, you land at the airport. How's it unfold from there? Are you guys taking everybody together on a bus? Everybody renting cars? How do the logistics work out?
Yeah, we meet up in a town called Vitoria. It's not too far from. It's about a 6-hour drive from Rio, but like a 2-hour flight from São Paulo. And we have everybody rent cars. We usually only have about 2 or 3 in our caravan, and we bomb out to a town about 2.5 hours from there. That's probably the closest town to that big overhung jump.
Nice. What's the scenery look like out there? Like, paint us a picture of Brazil and base jumping out there.
It's definitely not Europe. It's really it's a lot of green coming from Southern California. We're used to everything being brown all the time. It's definitely jungle. Lots of farms, lots of tropical fruit everywhere. It's beautiful. I've been enjoying it since I've been going down there. It's amazing.
Nice. And before we get into more about the course, which we definitely want to delve into, I'm kind of curious to ask you about your transition into instruction, because I know that you've waited a long time in order to get into it. What finally motivated that shift to start a course?
For Julie and I, she's actually has a little bit more background in coaching and teaching and base jumping than I do. But she's, the two of us together really kind of found early 2020 that it was, it's a really good idea for us to get into it, just because, this is what we're both passionate about, and we see a definite need these days with the sport getting bigger, more people getting into it. Definitely, I would say my transition really kind of happened a little bit sooner mentally, just with just a couple of accidents with very close friends, and then just seeing the way kind of the mentality in the sport in general was going. It could just use somebody along the sidelines going like, hey, there might be a better way to do things than the way things are going right now.
Yeah, I totally hear you on that. What was it that was there anything that kept you from seeing? Because you've said that basically the same thing for years now, and been still kind of just on the sidelines of instruction, giving what you could to our community, and then finally now you're like, okay, I got to formalize this. So was it that like you realized that the needs that you're talking about were greater than could be accomplished without the course? Or I'm also specifically like interested in, what kept you from doing this earlier, basically.
Really, I guess getting married really was, and meeting Julia was kind of having a little bit of a purpose and a goal, a joint goal between the two of us. It became a little less selfish, I guess, just with having her around.
Nice. Yeah. A good
So it's
partner on
probably the
these
biggest
things
one.
is pretty awesome to have. Like, it seems like every good base instruction course has like kind of a partnership like that. Like Jimmy and Marta, like Dukes and Sam, like they all kind of like just cruise together and like complementing one another. It's an interesting thing. Not a whole lot of other realms do like the instruction come off as a partnership, but I think more commonly than not in base jumping it does.
Yeah, for sure. We're pretty stoked to have kind of playing around with bringing Dicto down as well as an assistant instructor. He was pretty clutch on the last one, and he's coming down in October with us again.
Nice. All right. Well, moving on to the course, we want to get into kind of the progression talk, and I want to start with what skills or competencies are your course focus is your course focusing on?
One of the biggest lackings that I see, especially with American progression or American base jumpers, is slider up. Like we're We have a great bridge. We got in Idaho, we've got tons of slider down cliffs, but the serious lacking that we have is slider up and terminal objects. You have a lot of jumpers and just no objects. So getting people that experience on safe and forgiving objects is really important. And then just kind of making people realize that traveling's the best way to do that. Like, get out of the U.S., go to a place with safe and forgiving objects that you can do a lot. And that's, our Brazil course was really garnered around that, is that people's first time putting a slider on their rigs can be really hairy. And looking at the statistics on the base fatality list, it's, where people's usually small mistakes here and there made in the subterminal realm become fatal mistakes in the terminal environment.
Yeah, it's a real juxtaposition with the European community. Like a lot of the people here, I would say the vast majority have done a couple of slider down or off jumps and then immediately go to the cliff and never go back. Like, people that I jump with used to think I was crazy because I wanted to slider down jump a lot of these cliffs. And so the American progression is much different than what's going on in Europe. Do you think that that's going to change with your students, or is it just mostly slider down? Because obviously those are the objects in the US that you're able to hit, that are more applicable and easily accessible. Or do you think that this is becoming slider up becoming more prevalent?
I would say that the massive demand in the U.S., especially with here in Southern California, is that we have a lot of very, very current and active wingsuit skydivers, and that terminal two-piece tracking experience in base jumping is just seen as like a barrier or a hurdle to just kind of hop over on your path to wingsuit base jumping. And I would like to think that our course is not a part of that, a small hurdle to leap over. It's more of like an introduction to this realm, and at least get their brain turning on a lot of the stuff that they will completely overlook if they just take a first jump course at the bridge, throw a wingsuit on and then just go start hopping off of stuff with a wingsuit on. That's where our course is really is trying to get people to realize that you can do this in a safe environment, and having a progressed outlook on terminal base jumping rather than just getting straight into a wingsuit is a better way to do it.
Well, let's talk about some of that brain work for a second, because in the pre-interview, you mentioned decision-making being one of the competencies that your course kind of covers. And I'm curious for you to delve a little bit more into that. How are you guys developing this decision-making? What kind of decision-making are you looking for in people?
I mean, that's kind of the hard one with any, like, each individual is different. And if they're there and they're, want to make base jumping a lifelong goal, a lifelong passion, then starting off in that first slider up terminal base jumping realm, in a two-piece or even just slick, your decision making is way more like, it's right in your face. It's not the problem with putting a wingsuit on and with that limited decision making skills in the base jumping realm, is that there's quite often the decision that kills you is made, seconds, if not more, quite a few seconds before it actually kills you. And in the terminal tracking world, things are right in your face. You're having to make those decisions way quicker. You're typically pulling, using your eyeballs to look at the ground, which is something that's brand new for a lot of people coming straight from skydiving.
So now we're talking more of like developing intuitive action, intuitive decision making, rather than analytical. Is that where we're going?
I mean, and it's definitely with both. Like, if you put people in with that low experience numbers or even time in the sport in a way more safe environment, in more overhung objects, better landing areas, and you force them to operate in a lower performing wing, you give them a better chance of success to develop that decision making skills that will pay off well into the future.
Yeah, I mean, like, on a personal level, wouldn't you agree? I mean, like, even all three of us sitting here, like, if we had known like our longevity in the sport and that we would be doing this like for like a lifelong, as you were saying, it would have made that progression feel so much easier. I mean, I remember like doing my first terminal trips to like Norway. It was like, man, it felt so far away. Like I had to save so much money and I was like never sure I was going to get back there. And it just felt so like hurried and like felt like I had to get everything done because this trip was like cost so much. But like, look at us now. Like, I mean, can't even count how many trips we've done. Like, I mean, I moved to Europe for it and, now I've got cliffs in my backyard. So it's like, this isn't the case for everyone, but, with trips like Brazil, that's a little bit closer with more and more terminal cliffs opening around the US. It seems like, I think people can look at this as like, they don't need to be in such a hurry. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the bigger problems that we have in the US now is that we have highly experienced wingsuit skydivers. We have objects around here that aren't beginner friendly. I mean, for various reasons, just doing your first wingsuit base jump in the US in and of itself has multiple hurdles, whether it's the approach, whether it's the landing area, whether it's the legality. Um, it's just trying to remove those things, put people that are in a very early stage of their base jumping careers to, take away some of those hurdles and make them focus on the actual brass tacks of jumping rather than, how, is it a 3-hour approach? Am I having to hit the ground running? If you take away all those things, people actually have a chance to learn how to do a good terminal exit, how to, make a good decision when you need to pull, canopy pattern in the terminal, how a slider up parachute opens. A lot of American jumpers really don't know what's going on, after their hand leaves the pilot chute. Um,
So let's talk early on then, since it seems like we're delving into the next part of this, which is what should people be ready for, or what should they have developed before they come to you to take your course? What kind of skills are you looking for?
I mean, this starts even at before our bridge courses, but solid canopy work. Our minimum is 200 jumps, but what we're really looking for in those 200 jumps, or preferably more, is having a full grasp of canopy flight. Like we see really big payoffs with people that do our bridge courses and our Brazil courses with a little bit of a crew background. Helps a lot. Like at least here at Scott Elsinore, we have a massive crew community. They're super open and welcoming. They hold pup camps all the time, and we've had a couple students go through just a basic crew pup camp. It costs basically nothing, and you get a full grasp of what your parachute's capable of doing. The canopies are quite similar, and you're really learning what you can do up high and what you can do down low. That's going to really save your butt in the base environment.
So if somebody can't make it to Elsinore to take some crew instruction, and you've got somebody maybe across the country that's gearing up for one of your courses, what would you recommend there?
Definitely getting their hands on a 7-cell. I mean, even some of your basic skydiving 7-cells are really better than getting into a more high performance semi-elliptical canopy. Um, Learning how that parachute flies, learning what each one of your riser groups does, fronts and rears, learning how to make flat turns, being able to have a more or less kind of skydive drop zone mentality when it comes to canopy landings, to like instead of just thinking of your world as a pattern, kind of seeing what your parachute can do at low speeds down low, is really going to pay off big time.
Nice. And I'll just add in a quick recommendation. If anyone's working on canopy work, I highly recommend that you get Brian Germain's book, A Parachute and Its Pilot. If you're an intro skydiver, or even if you're working on advanced level stuff, he goes through a lot of the fundamental dynamics that are applicable in every parachute. So like when you get to a Scotty Bob and he starts talking at you about angle of attack and trim and all of this, you already have like a basic understanding of how he's trying to transmit knowledge to you. So highly recommend that book, Parachute and Its Pilot by Brian Germain. Going forward, Scotty, like, okay, we've got canopy work. What are some other things that you'd like to see people develop in the skydiving world before they get to you in the base world?
Rigging knowledge is a giant one. We've literally had people show up to courses already. I won't name names. It's cool. We helped them out a bunch, but people literally showing up to courses and they've never taken a canopy off risers, had no idea how to put their slider on, um, had no idea how to configure slider up, and that's kind of one of the bigger ones, going from a bridge-centric progression in the U.S. and moving on to a terminal world. If you, in general, just don't know how these things operate, that's a good thing to kind of get your hands on before you even end up at one of these courses.
Okay, and I've got
we do a lot. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, like, I want to jump in and see if you guys agree with this, because it's something I've been trying to like kind of push, and I think there's a basic mentality that like riggers are this pedestal person in our sport, and as you're coming up, you got 200 jumps, you're looking at base jumping like, oh, that's just not attainable, or it's not like applicable to me. But like if you really think about it, like being a base rigger, you are operating in a riskier environment, like making harder like decisions with your gear than would most riggers. Like, you rig a reserve, okay, that's going to be opened like under duress, maybe 1,000 feet over the ground, clear of hazards. Okay, like first base pack job, you're opening that thing next to hard objects 200 feet over the ground. So like, let me hear your opinions here. Like, should we be like kind of expecting even more out of base jumpers than we would out of riggers?
I was gonna say that, like, if you were to take a beginner base jumper or even an advanced base jumper and give them, like a rating system, like let's say they were like video game characters, right? And you had like 20 points per character, and I would definitely put, body flying skills, canopy flying skills, and rigger skills. Those would be like the three main categories, and you were able to like level up. I would say that like when the three of us got involved in base jumping, most of the old timers were like a level 10 at rigging, and as the years have progressed, those levels have progressively gotten worse and worse. And I don't know what it is, like people taking courses too early, not really like the culture hasn't really caught up with that as much. But Scotty, yeah, what do you think? Like, how are people going to change that? How is that culture going to be changed?
I mean, especially at our courses, that's a good chunk of our first and second day, even before the first day, is just inspecting gear and getting a good. If we have the privilege of having some of our students that are local, we do that at the drop zone well before the course. And I think that's kind of a must. That is, if your expectation is to just be handed a parachute system and go jump off a bridge without really getting a full idea of how it goes, you're going to be sorely awakened. Especially if you show up at our course, you're going to have to learn, or at least have a willingness to learn this stuff. Because especially when you swap over to the slider up environment, there's like that basic rigging stuff becomes very life and death crucial. Because if you don't even know where your brake lines go, where as when you're hooking up your rig for your first time doing your first slider up jump, then those are usually giant red flags for me, for Julia and I, going like, holy cow, you really did not prepare at all to get here.
Also, you'd be terrified if you were up there not knowing any of that. Like, I mean, if the first time you ever hooked any of this stuff up was like the jump right before you like hucked off a cliff, you'd be taking a lot of that stuff on faith and credit, like, I hope this works. I hope that's like full makes sense. Like, I hope that I didn't mess that up. Like, man, that would be just nerve-wracking.
That's the transition really from what I like, the big transition, the more mental transition I think a lot of people have from going from skydiving to base jumping, is that full realization, like, hey, wait a minute, like, I'm responsible for all of this. Like, it's not like my packer or my rigger, that my local rigger, like I'm responsible for all this. And then you're like, aha, you're onto it now. Like, you reap what you sow. So.
Oh, it's real.
No, totally.
Gear fear is real too, man. Like, even when I take some time off, like when I hook up a new container or something like that, like, I know what I'm doing, but man, it sure adds to the nerves. And like, I can't even imagine, like, you're jumping for your first couple of jumps off of a cliff, and you have gear fear behind that. definitely pays to do a little bit of research and, even buy your canopy early and throw it out on the ground, pack it, unpack it, inspect all the little seams and everything, like get intimately familiar with that piece of gear, because fuck, it's the only thing saving your life.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. Like, if you're thinking about base jumping and you're a skydiver that's just starting out, my main piece of advice is don't let people do things for you. Do them. There's nothing in this like system that is not comprehensible or workable by you. So like, even if it's something complex, like be there when it's happening. Like, don't just hand your stuff over to somebody and then give them a credit card and grab it back. Like, you're not doing yourself a service. So, Scotty, moving forward, I got to ask you about this last part of skills that you want developed before you get to the course. And this one came out in the pre-interview too.
I knew that was
a will to live. So can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, you can chalk a lot of things up, or a lot of actions or decisions or reactions that people have as like just sheer ignorance, and that's totally cool, and that's why we're here. You can fix ignorance. That's an easy one, but what you really can't fix with some people is kind of the mental battles or things that might be going on in their life. And really the whole will to live thing comes from just having a positive outlook on life. Base jumping should never be an avenue of self-destruction. And not to get too dark about it, but I've definitely I mean, I've even had times in my life where I thought that jumping was kind of an avenue of self-destruction, and I chose to make that a bigger priority to fix that problem before I continued to progress in jumping. I think the mental battles that people go through need to take way more priority than a lot of the recreational hurdles that we want to get over jumping wise, and I think it gets overlooked very often.
So you're saying basically like sound mind before you approach the sport.
Correct.
And so how are you evaluating that? Are you guys going through some kind of process for that? Are you finding it out as you go? And what do you recommend for people? Like, should they, maybe like before anyone made a decision this serious, you'd usually have to see a medical professional. Like, they don't let you be a special operator unless you go and like get checked out by a therapist. They don't let you do a lot of dangerous stuff in this world without doing that. So what are your recommendations, and how are you evaluating people's mental preparedness in this, will to live realm?
Yeah, we definitely have a benefit of having a lot of local students close to us, but definitely people that we meet right off the bat. Where one of my bigger things, if I choose to accept somebody as a student and to work with them on their goals, is kind of get to know them a little bit more. Just talk to somebody, have a basic conversation where they are in their life, what's going on. And I'm sure people realize this, but I'm definitely listening to what they're saying and kind of taking like, all right, I'm making my own definitely judgments. And there's definitely some red flags here that come out here and there. And then I usually, if there's a red flag, I kind of address it immediately and kind of be like, well, do you think this is an issue? Do you think when you're standing on the edge of a bridge or on the edge of a cliff, is this going to be in the back of your mind, or is the task at hand going to be in the top of your mind? And at least having the conversation before you get to that situation is probably a way bigger way. It's way better, more beneficial for me, and it's way more beneficial to the student to at least address those kind of mental health issues before they get there. We've been fortunate enough not to really have many, but there's definitely some people in my past and that I've met through jumping that I definitely have had those questions of being like, is this person all the way, are they invested entirely mentally in what's going on at the time?
I can speak from personal experience. I've had some dark days where I was chronically ill, and I wouldn't say that I was self-destructive per se, but I think that even when you're having some really difficult times, and what we can distill this whole conversation down to would be is like, how often are you just saying fuck it and hucking it? Like, if you just say fuck it, then you're not relying on your training. Your eyes are closed to any good decision making. So yeah, man, like just, I think maybe people listening to this can be like, all right, how often am I saying like, just fuck it, like it's a pretty easy metric right there.
So, Scotty, what can you give us a characterization? What does it look like? What's the difference between somebody jumping that has a will to live and somebody that does not have a will to live? Is there a way that you could, give us kind of a narrative on what that looks like, how that would appear?
I mean, again, going back to that ignorance side of things, I've met quite a few people that just don't know uh, about that when they do certain things a certain way that it's going to potentially hurt or kill them. Uh, but when you really kind of start questioning people's thought processes when they're presented with different avenues, not even really expensive avenues. If you take money out of the equation, you just kind of present a different way of going about something, and they continue to make that decision, that extremely way riskier decision to get their goal, whatever their goal that they put on a pedestal, as fast as humanly possible. That's when you kind of go like, okay, then it's really just about doing things the way you want to do it, and not a better prescribed method, I guess.
So, when we're talking prescribed methods, let's expand out a little bit. And let me ask you, what do you think of the progression in general in skydiving and base jumping?
I mean, in general, I think it's gotten better over the few years. Definitely in the last 10 years, it's gotten way better. The side and people are always like, oh, there's more people getting into base jumping and things are sketchy and the jumpers don't know what's going on. It's kind of the typical like back in my day type shit. Uh, but in general, I think it's actually gotten better. Um, I'd use Lauterbrunnen as a perfect example. Like Lauterbrunnen used to be fucking scary. Like every load you went on in like 2010 to like 2000 really 13, you saw something crazy. Fucking not every load, but like every trip you saw someone almost die, or you did see somebody die. And being in a place like Lauterbrunnen, we're seeing that many jumps. It really kind of makes you scratch your head and go like, damn. But I'd say younger base jumpers in general have a little bit more fear, which is a good thing because there's more knowledge out there. Um, but that being said, it's like how is that fear being addressed? And people still have that drive to get to, wingsuit base jumping or, X, Y, and Z, whatever their progression goals are. But how you're addressing that fear, not just as an instructor or a mentor, um, or just a friend, that seems to be kind of the battle these days. Like, how do you give people the proper avenues to get to where they want to get? That's the current battle, I would say.
Without unnecessary fear, getting them to the goals that they're driving for.
Giving them the right fear that doesn't make them turn off completely, or at the same time make them fully realize that mistake is not new. It's been done numerous times. I think there's I guess another question coming up, but with my progression, the reason I progressed the way I did is because I didn't have anybody around me that was, I started in rural North Carolina. There was like 4 base jumpers out there. Like we all were kind of figuring it out completely on our own. And in ignorance, you have no fear. Like you're surrounded by the 3 guys that are making bad decisions, the same bad decisions around you. And that's how you learn. But when you're introduced to fear from an outside source, something that you haven't personally seen, you have 2 options. You can either accept that, take it under consideration and modify your decisions, or you can blindly ignore it and be like, well, that guy isn't me and he doesn't understand me, and that's not going to be me. I'm better than that. And that's really where we're at these days, is that either the acceptance of fear or the denial of fear. And that's kind of, again, goes back to the heart of instruction, is how do you at least make people accept fear rather than deny it and then blindly walk into any situation completely unprepared.
How would you base your own fear now? I know it's not something that's always necessarily linear, but as someone who's experienced as you, would you say that your fear, where is your fear in your progression?
I mean, my fear now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm about to have a kid, so that stepped it up a couple notches. But yeah, I mean, my fear now is really leaving a kid behind without a dad. Um, when I'm personally jumping, I've dialed some of my decisions back down. Um, Not just to set an example for students, but also the realization that, if I get hurt or killed, it's directly impacting another human's life that it's not even here yet. So
I like that
mean,
mentality.
we've all seen this stuff happen already, and it's not something that it's just horrible.
So right there, Scotty, you're tying your fear back to an underlying value. You're saying like, okay, what am I most afraid of? Leaving this kid behind. And so all my decision making is going to expand outward from that central value. Do you find that people that are making the worst mistakes in our sport just are, lacking that underlying value? Like they just don't give a fuck. And you're like, okay, well, I got to get you to give a fuck about something. Otherwise, like your fear isn't going to ever turn on because you don't give a fuck.
I mean, I've been there. I've not given tons of fucks for years, man. I definitely think the sketchier years of my base jumping progression and life have been surrounded by the years of not giving a fuck. So I agree with you entirely. But I mean, I'm definitely also not promoting that every base jumper go out there and have a kid. Like that's not the solution either. But yeah, like you don't have to do that to give a fuck. Like it's definitely, I think a lot of, especially with Jimmy Pouchard, who's a hero of mine for sure, is it can be just the friends that you have around you and reminding them constantly and daily that you care about them, and that not only do their decisions, your decision that you're making right now on the edge of a cliff don't just impact you, they impact people around the world, and it motivates you to really get in touch with people, be more outgoing, like get to actually love the community for what it is, and that actually makes you want to give a fuck.
Growing that family, doesn't need to be biological to leave some pretty deep scars behind when you're gone. One thing I was going to say too, that a motivation that for me earlier was, before having a kid and now having another very soon is, man, it just keeps getting better. The suits are getting better. The more jumps you make, like, the better you feel, the more friends you develop, the more the network grows, the more different interesting places you get to go and jump. I mean, it just keeps getting better and better. Would you guys agree?
Totally agree.
Yeah, without a doubt, man. Without a doubt.
Yeah, and actually that leads into the next question for Scotty, which is, what do you think of where the culture is going with the increase in technology and the ease with which somebody can just pay for these things and have an F1 car, equivalent in the skydiving and base world?
Yeah, I mean, if we're just talking about technology in general getting better and how it's affecting progress, the suits are way easier to fly for sure, but it's still the same decision-making battles that we've been dealing with for years. I think the rush, all the rage nowadays, is to get into the largest surface area wingsuit possible. That we've seen that issue because not only are they're big, they're easier to pull, the start arcs are great. Like, why wouldn't I just jump right into that thing? And I just go right back to a conversation that I heard in Romsdal, Norway, in around 2011. I was in a room with Robbie Pechnik and Luca and Tom Eric Hyman, and I remember Robbie talking about when Tony suits were becoming all the rage and larger surface area, higher, lower stall speed. Like, yeah, these things start really fast, but when people learn how to fly slow and learn how that flying slow in a wingsuit is you can get away with it. The second they start flying terrain, they're all going to hit the ground. And he said that in 2011. And I remember hearing him say that and going like, I should probably remember that, because that was really when Tonys were starting to become a big deal. And now when we're, nowadays, flash forward a decade or more, that progression standpoint seems to be the bigger, the realization is that once you've developed that decision-making skills from either two-piece tracking or flying not the biggest wingsuit on the market, until you've developed those decision-making skills, then slapping a bigger wingsuit on is not going to make you a better wingsuiter. It's just going to make you a really bad decision maker. You're going to put yourselves in way more committing environments. You're going to be jumping shorter rock drops with longer glides, and that serious lack of time in the sport that you skipped right over is what's eventually going to get you. It's not even a new phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that's been going on for years. And as safe and as good as we make the suits, we're only as good as the brain between our two ears.
So it sounds like you're saying if you're just using the suit to fly rather than flying the suit, then you're really not setting yourself up for a sustainable long career. You're just superficially getting into a slot like right now that like kind of might look good, but eventually is going to catch up with you. And if your goal is to be a decent or an excellent wingsuiter, then you're not serving yourself. Am I kind of characterizing that correctly?
Yeah, for sure. And the bigger caveat is that, well, why can't I just supplement my lack of or my box checking mentality in the other avenues of base jumping with just a lot of skydive training? And then, I can just rattle off quite a few names: Jonathan Flores, Jeff Nebukoff. I mean, that mentality eventually, if you don't treat base jumping as a sport in and of itself and skip right over those progression paths and don't develop that good decision making, the skydive training is actually probably what's going to get you killed. Like, you're going to have way too much confidence in the suit, and it's not going to go well.
Yeah. Well, that leads right into the next thing. Oh, Scotty, go ahead.
I was going to say that your rating, like I was talking about earlier, of your piloting skills will diminish your decision-making abilities for sure. And I think there's also a level of cognitive load that we can all handle. And when you're new to the base environment, you're tapping right into all of that. You've got tunnel vision, and just making simple decisions, starts to leave you. And those skills of flying in the skydiving environment are going to go right out the window. It's being in the mountains, having your feet right on that exit point that really helped develop those skills for years and years. There was something that I wanted to ask you about too, was like your, what do you think? Because there seems to be like quite a big niche of people flying one-piece tracking suits. How do you see that fitting into this progression and students coming up?
I think they're great. They're great tools. They're great toys. Like, they're awesome. They're super fun. I've been having a blast kind of figuring the sausage and the ETMD out. Once it gets as a tool for progression, if somebody's goal is to be in a wingsuit in the mountains, then getting that whether you get that progression in a two-piece or in like a small one-piece, that's all right too. I would highly recommend starting with a two-piece, but having kind of that progression start in the smallest surface area thing on your body is a better route, and it forces you to stay to safer objects. That's the reality. We've seen lately that when people start putting one pieces on, and then they put 1 or 2 seasons on them, they're just going to start taking them to more committing places. And as long as you're coming at that progression with that thing in mind, like, hey, I'm flying basically a shitty wingsuit, and you're staying to more safer objects, that's great. That's a good part of your progression. That's fine. But getting that background and decision making on your way to getting in a wingsuit can totally happen in a two-piece. Like, you can totally go from two-piece tracking to wingsuit base jumping, like most people have done over the years. I don't think it's necessary to throw a one-piece on, but they're definitely fun, for sure.
Yeah, they are fun for sure.
So moving back into some of the cultural aspects, how would you like to see our culture shift in the next generation, and how is your education during this progression with smaller wingsuits and developing your course? How are you trying to accomplish that?
Yeah, I guess now you're just talking about it, I wanted to add one more thing on there, but setting realistic expectations on not just the time, but the amount of jumps that people need to do before they even think that they're ready to go on to the next step. Base jumping should be it's a lifetime of knowledge, and people are trying to pack this stuff into like 1 or 2 seasons, and it's people definitely are skydiving way more. That's awesome. People are going on and getting jumps on more repeatable objects. That's great, but the real limiting factor is time. Like you don't like making that timeline stretch out a little bit before you go like, okay, now I want to put an ATC on and go make my first wingsuit base jump, or put a freak on and go do my first wingsuit base jump. Like that realistically should not be. That's not a 1 year. That's not a 2 year. That's used for a lot of people. It's not even a 3-year goal. Like from when you start base jumping, it should be a multi-year process to even get to that point. So making sure people have realistic expectations, I think, would be a really good one. And then
just to jump in real quick on that one particular topic, do you think that there is kind of a pay-for-play culture shift that's kind of fighting that mentality? Because I've heard you say that term before. I'm just kind of wondering if that is the antithesis to the shift that you're trying to go for.
I think one of the like what I would like to see that our course does not become is a box checking thing on somebody's step towards greatness. It's not like, hey, yeah, I did this and now that means I can do this. It should be a window towards to future to elongate your lifespan in the sport. Yeah, I mean those things are definitely happening. I hope that I would really try to avoid our course becoming that or being that. But yeah, I would see that there are some people out there that want to just be told that the way they're doing things or the way their expectations are set up is totally fine and this is the way to do it. Just pay me. I would rather that not become reality, because a lot of the things that we were talking about earlier, having a more rounded mindset before you get into a super committing sport like wingsuit base jumping, it's a prerequisite, and just glossing over that and paying somebody to get you there is not the way to do it.
Though it sounds like you're saying it's not just paying somebody to get you there, but it's more like paying somebody to validate you, or paying them for the confidence so that you can make bad decisions, rather than paying you, Scotty Bob, for educating them.
Yeah, it's a fine line when you operate in that. For Julia and I as well, starting courses, it's like we know what people's goals are and what they want to do. It's literally written all over people's faces. I mean, don't get me wrong, wingsuit base jumping is awesome. I love it. But making sure people are fully aware of the risks of the stuff they're doing, and that there is an avenue and there is an opportunity to do it in a stretched out timeline with more experience, and then also getting to enjoy base jumping for the best parts of it, which is travel and people. Like you get to meet more people. You're not turning yourself into a loner. You're getting to travel the world. You go see some awesome places, and you're doing it in a way more comforting, or at least a way less committed environment. That's really the goal.
Can you summarize your own progression in the sport from someone who was on many people's sort of short list to go in? And
yeah, I mean, I started base jumping on the East Coast of the United States, where we had not a lot of jumpers and not a lot of experienced jumpers, and definitely not a lot of experienced jumpers that wanted to give up information or be mentors. So it was kind of a lot of on my own, soloing. I definitely had some friends I jumped with, but a lot of my first 400 base jumps were solos. And then going back to the idea of that ignorance is the worst. Like if you don't have somebody around you to offer up information or offer you a different way of doing things, you're just going to do whatever's put in front of you. So I think that's kind of the way I look at instruction, is at least putting the information in someone's face. And in the end of the day, it's still base jumping. People are going to make whatever calls they do, and that's totally fine. But a lot of the horrible decisions that I made progression-wise came from the fact that I had no information in front of me.
So what that sounds like to me is that like being the lone wolf on your base progression is kind of a bad move. I mean, we all like to go do some solos. Like I know I love to go do a solo, but like what you're saying is that, you know, at the beginning and like, or maybe even key moments in your progression shouldn't be solo. Are you saying that they need to be with an instructor, or they should just need to be with people they trust, or?
Yeah, I tell people on all our courses, like having a progression buddy is probably even more important than having an instructor telling you exactly what to do and how to jump and when to jump. Like that's at the end of the day, that's why we're here, is to at least give good information. But if you have someone that's an equal to you, you know, your breast bro that, you know, is around the same, you know, same time frame progression wise as you, that's way more important than always having an instructor around you.
Yeah.
You keep each other in check, and you at least don't have that instructor student, you know, mental thing going on. You consider yourselves as equals, and you at least start having conversations that, you know, and you started off with an equal mindset. And that's giant. For me, it was Ian Mitchard. Shout out to Ian Mitchard. What up, bro?
Shout out, Ian. You know, I'm thinking back to some of the,
man.
I was thinking back to some of those times that we spent together in Chamonix, and can you remember some of those solo rollers that came through? It was kind of all put like, you know, the hair on the back of our necks to stand up a little bit, didn't it? Like, yeah, those people coming into town by themselves. And
scary out is most of them aren't here anymore. So it's
yeah.
Man, we could write a book about the Chamonix like 2012 to, you know, 2016 years. You could write a whole book about those years.
Yeah.
So good.
I wanted to ask you, as far as the progression, because I think this is a big deal, and I think it's played, I think you've been a big part of this too, and not necessarily in a negative way, but what do you think about videos and social media, and how does that change people's decisions? And
yeah, I've had an ongoing love-hate battle with social media ever since I really kind of got into it, and it's nowadays as it gets even more prevalent, and it's pretty I don't want to sound too much like an old guy these days, but yeah, I mean the shit's deadly for sure. And when you put base jumping into that mix, and you get that ego boost from showing people what you're doing and how badass is this and how liberating and how inspirational, like just so everybody knows, there's really nothing inspirational in my opinion about jumping a wingsuit off a cliff. Like it's not inspirational in my opinion. Like you're doing something incredibly selfish and taking entire sheer joy out, you know, for yourself. And if you're doing it right, you're doing it entirely for yourself, and you're landing on the ground and being like, fuck yeah, that was rad. Let's pack it up and do it again. That's great as long as you look at it from that mindset. But the second you start seeing yourself as this kind of alter ego, inspirational figure, it really starts screwing your head up. You know, I totally point it back at myself. Like when you start seeing views going up, and you even have companies giving you like, hey man, you got like 1 million views on this video. That's sick. And you're like, yeah. And then what's even more fucked up is when you have people come at you and tell you, you're the reason why I got into base jumping because I saw your videos. And then that person goes in. That really kind of messes with your psyche quite a bit. And that's happened to me quite a few times. And I think for me now, the social media side is really, I guess on the personal side, is just to show, you know, that you can survive through this whole journey, and you can come out the other end a sane person, or a relatively sane person. But try to eliminate ego from your actual physical act of jumping as much as possible. You can be proud of who you are and what you're doing, but you know, if the point or goal of you being on that cliff or you in that wingsuit, wherever it is to show off and, you know, impress people for this skill or this skill or this skill, then you probably are there for the wrong reasons.
At the end of the day, the best part of those videos is when you're at the exit point at the landing area chatting with your buddies. Those are the parts of those videos that we're going to be looking back for.
Yeah.
No doubt, man. Like those high fives, I wish that I had like kept all of those as a compilation, just all of the lands and then like the high five slaps. I'd have like thousands of those. It'd be just such an incredible little like
I can I can
span.
actually go back through my video catalog, and you can kind of the years where I was probably going the most hardcore wingsuiting. You can tell because like my camera turns on about 7 seconds before exit, and it turns off when I'm either under canopy or on the ground. Like
Hmm.
it's
Interesting.
my B-roll files, like of all my like high fives, hand slaps, going around town doing stuff, is usually like before that era, and then the more of it is like probably after 2016. I have way more of that now, but those years right in the middle there, like the 2012 to 2016, 2017 years, those are the ones that it's like there's no B-roll, like very little. Like it's
Interesting. Sorry, Matt, I'm hogging the questions here, but I want to ask something that I was wanted to go on was like, as sort of going off of my original question is like you were on everyone's or most people's short list, and out of a group of those people, you survived. Um, what what do you think? Was it luck? Was it skill? Was it a combination of the two? What do you think carried you through that?
definitely luck, 100% luck. I maybe also that will to live thing we were talking about earlier. I definitely did, even in the middle of all that stuff, walk down off a few jumps. Um, Not trying to make that like on a pedestal or anything, but it's uh, in general, it's mostly luck, to be honest. It's even most of the guys that were jumping, low. You know that crew in Sham. Like it's a lot of the guys. Some of the guys are still there and still jumping, still active. But you're like, there's not one of us that still doesn't remember those summers in Sham and going like, holy shit. How was not banned way sooner or more often, and then two, like, how do we get back there and make it legal again? So, it's the double-edged sword. You're like,
Yeah.
how is this legal? And holy shit, was that fun? Oh my god.
Well,
Yeah.
speaking of people that have some luck and some people that ran out of some luck, I'd like to ask you about the people that you saw as having to get lucky before they even left and told them so. Like, to put a more direct point on it, I know three people off the top of my head that you literally said, "Hey, man, if you do the same thing that you did on that last jump, you're not going to make it. Please don't do this." Like, what's it like to be seeing somebody make a decision like that and know that they have to get lucky in order to make it through?
I mean, it sucks at the end of the day watching anybody go in or dealing with that. You know, it does suck. But at the end of the day, you can only just say things. You can just talk and try to remind somebody that base jumping is not worth dying over, and people are going to make their own decisions. It's kind of one of the more beautiful things about the sport, though, is that it is entirely responsible on the individual, and you can only say so much until you literally be like, man, I sound like a complete asshole right now because I'm telling this person they're going to die all the time. But that stuff weighs on me too. Like I think about what I'm saying before I say it. I think a lot more now than I used to. Um, but as you get older in the sport, you still see the same mistakes being made over and over again. And what can you do? Just set the example and try to give people good information.
So, if I can delve into this a little bit more, what do you think the disconnect was? Because I know that there's a disconnect in a lot of us when somebody says, like, "Hey, man, you're going to die." And usually what they're talking about is like, you're going to die. You're going to die eventually if you keep doing what you're doing. But like in some of these cases, you're like, no, dude, like, you can't actually do what you just said that you're going to do. Like, physics does not support that. Like, what do you think the disconnect is between you transmitting that information, trying to educate somebody, and them just like you know basically not caring?
Uh, I mean, it's personal ego for sure, and then it also can be like the way I present that information. I think you're a personal witness to a couple times where I had that conversation with certain individuals and maybe came off like a complete douchebag, but
Well,
but
I was there definitely for a couple of those where somebody was planning on doing something outrageously stupid, and you like basically just snapped them off, and you're like, no, you cannot do that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, and that's a hard one for people to like accept, especially when they're not under duress. Like, I think in those cases, like, you definitely approach them as though they were like under duress, like in the situation that was about to like occur, like, and they were like about to lose their lives. But like, that is kind of different than the situation I'm talking about. I'm like talking about more like the Jared Garnett's, where like you're on the exit point with him and you're like, no, dude, you don't get it. Like that last one, I saw that happen. Like, you were lucky to have gotten, I don't know. Like, I'm an experienced expert at this, and I cannot explain how you did not die on the last one. And so like this one, please, for the love of God, do not do that again.
yeah. I mean, becoming a better communicator, really that's kind of the goal, at least. But I mean, in Jared Garnett's case, like, dude, I mean, so many people had said something, and in the same case as Mehmet, same exit point actually. So many people had said the exact same things to this person over and over and over again, and yet they chose not to listen. I don't know if there's really any better ways of communicating than that. I don't
Or
know
maybe
what,
there's a perspective that you could give on how to avoid being that person. Like, what's the deal? Like, I mean, you could always just come up on the next one, or take a break or something. What's the kryptonite here?
I mean, jumpers from day one having an open mind to criticism. That really starts when they start base jump, or really when you start skydiving. Is that if you accept that role as kind of like the rogue or the rule breaker, or the, like, I'm doing things different because I do things differently, that's usually a big indicator of problems. Not that Jared really was doing that, but when you put yourself as in this juxtaposed position as like, I'm doing this for X, Y, and Z, and nothing anybody else tells me around me, or multiple people around me have told me that I shouldn't do it, that should be a giant red flag warning of like, hey, maybe these people aren't all assholes. Maybe they're actually trying to give me good information, or at least maybe trying to save my life.
Yeah, that's, like, maybe even just to some people that are listening to this who haven't started base jumping yet, and you're gonna hear, like, I'm listening to Scotty right now, thinking about how many times I was a dick too, and how like I was so unequipped to come into some of those conversations, and how much emotion was around it. It's difficult. And were we all at Brevant when Jared went in?
I would, yeah.
Okay.
I remember exactly what Matt said. That's pretty much what I said. So
yeah, I asked him if he knew where the landing
crazy.
area was.
Yeah.
Right before I heard the impact, it was like, there was something written on his body language that was just, something was not right. And that was a difficult one.
Yeah. That was definitely a strange one.
So moving on then from people dying, which we always come to in this podcast, we also want to know from you, are you afraid of dying? And more specifically, are you afraid of dying while base jumping?
I would actually say my real biggest fear of dying is electrocution, just so everybody knows that. I don't know. It's a very strange childhood fear. I don't know why. If anybody has ever seen me try to jump a car, it's really embarrassing because I am deathly afraid of it. I'm like, this thing's going to kill me, and like, I hate it. So now that you all know, don't come at me with fucking... Yeah, I think anybody who says they're not, that base jump says they're not afraid of dying base jumping, is either psychotic or they're a bold-faced liar. Like, that fear should be the forefront of your thought, going back to that whole will to live thing. If it's not, there's something else going on. I think even going back to those Chamonix years we were talking about, Lo, like there was definitely kind of a mentality in some of the jumpers going on there that I would say a more callous nature to some of the most technical flying that we've probably done ever. It's at least for the majority, for me, it's just speaking for myself, definitely the most calculated in flying I have ever done was definitely in those summers. And just looking at some of the other jumpers on the cliff up there going like, man, you guys seem really flippant about this. Like, at the time I was kind of laughing about it, but looking back on it, I'm like, damn, we were kind of stupid. It's having a little bit more of a serious underlying, you can be happy, you can be totally like, you don't have to be scared shitless on a cliff and shaking your boots. But at the same time, like not having a full grasp of the reality of the situation when you go off to do certain things like this is, it shows. So it's somewhere in the middle. It's a balance of controlling the fear, but also not controlling it so much that you are obviously not taking things into consideration. It's somewhere right in the middle. And for sure, yeah, I'm especially now more than ever. Like the worst thing I could think about in my life, really, is other than electrocution, is dying in a base jump like everybody thought I would be by now.
We've talked a lot about lessons from your past. Can you summarize a few you'd like to leave behind or that are the strongest in your mind?
Definitely be open-minded in the sport. Be a well-rounded jumper. That's probably the biggest. I can't tell you how many times I've leaned on, aerial skills from jumping at doing triple gainers at the bridge, for my wingsuiting. And you're always going to put in the base jumping world, you're always going to find yourself in a situation that is brand new or pretty uniquely new. So if you only surround yourself with kind of narrow-minded, focused people that are only interested in one thing or constant self-gratification, then you're going to find yourself in a very bad environment. You can't just tell yourself, I'm not going to be there, because you're going to be there. And the only answer to that is to be open-minded and be well-rounded. Also, not being a loner in the sport, that's a big one. Kind of, we talked about it before, but have a buddy with you that's kind of around the same progression path and the same time frame. There's somebody that you can bounce ideas off of, somebody that you can talk about, your ex-girlfriend you just broke up with, and not just keeping like a mental health check on you, but also like a realistic physical jumping aspect. Like, having somebody there that gives a shit about you is important, so you don't make a really dumb decision just because you're all alone and you think the world's against you. And then, yeah, definitely learning how to say no. having an off switch is really important for me. I've had some of my favorite days of jumping, even in Chamonix, was, like people are rushing pack jobs and rushing to gondolas to get 3 in or 2 in before 10, and you're just like, some of the best days I had were like doing 1 in the morning at Brevant and then going to the cafe and having an omelet. Like, that was amazing. I had a great day.
I wonder if I could ask you more about the first one you mentioned, about people seeking constant personal satisfaction and removing yourself from groups of people like that. Do you have a moment or a story that you can recall from your personal life where you did that?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to throw it under the bus, but definitely some of the base jumping comps that went out there. Definitely a couple experiences at Turkey Boogies where you saw people just doing total one-upsmanships. And again, the base jumping comps, some of them in the past, I got kind of a toxic mentality about a lot of them, because you really kind of looked around at everybody that was there and you're like, wow, everybody's here just so they can post about it. Like, that's really shitty. Even when I was there, I'm like, man, I should be probably like remembering that even event organizers was like, are you guys making sure you're hashtagging this post? And you're like, who the fuck cares about that? Like, why should I give a shit about what hashtag I'm putting on my post right now? I'm about to go do something really stupid that I'm barely, that I'm basically not getting paid to do. Like, what does the hashtag have to do with that? I think now with the social media aspect of it, that's even less so if you take like a professional base jumper mindset out of it. Even when somebody's trying to get into the sport for those reasons that they can show off to the world with what they're doing, I think having a better grasp for themselves, especially in the first 3 to 5 years of base jumping, like post less, like, and if you have that mindset out from the start that I'm doing this for me, that'll carry even when you start getting jobs or going to events or going to, if you do somehow by the stroke of luck or sheer ignorance end up in like a more professional aspect in the sport, whatever that is, you'll have that as your base core belief, is that I'm doing this because it's fun and I enjoy being in the mountains with my friends. That's really, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. And when you have people telling you to do certain things for ulterior motives, you kind of can see through the veil a little bit and be like, huh, interesting. Okay. Gives you a little bit of insight.
Well, I'd like to follow up on the end of what you said and ask, is there a simple way that you use to analyze when to say no? Is there a simple answer to the question, when do you say no, Scotty Bob?
Definitely nowadays, weather. That's a big one. I found myself even recently, like if people are you get that, American in Europe mentality where you're on exit point, weather is shitty, but it's like the last week of your trip. I mean, we've all felt that before. We're like, I can, you start making marginal judgment calls based on the weather. And then definitely headspace. Headspace is a big one. Like if you're not there mentally, then you shouldn't be up there. I've walked down off of cliffs quite a few times because I literally just had so much crap going through my head that I was like, I should not be here. So I walked down. I think that happens to people more than they think. I think people can rationalize stuff going on in their life very easily. And it doesn't have to be somebody just went in front of you, so you need to take a week-long break. It can be girlfriends. It can be job-related. It can be anything. It really could be anything in your life that's making you kind of start losing that basic will to live thing. It doesn't mean you're suicidal. It just means that your mind is somewhere else, and it's not 100% on the task at hand. And that's what base jumping requires. It takes 100% of your mental capacity to do it successfully. And if you're not there, you should not be there.
Well, dang, Scotty, that was a lot to take in. That you've said quite a bit there. And so I'm just going to follow up with our last question. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we kind of conclude this interview, which has been a blast, man?
You're here. Good stuff.
Took a lot of great topics here and cleaved them off. So anything else like left on your mind to throw down on this podcast? And keep in mind that we'll do this as many times as necessary to get all of the nuggets out of Scotty Bob's head.
No, it's great. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm stoked to be here and stoked to talk to you.
Right on, man.
Right
Our
on.
pleasure.
So nothing left for the end of this podcast. You're solidly closing out on that last bit then, huh?
I think you were asking about Scotty Bucks, but...
Oh, yeah, let's go to that one. Oh, man. Oh, God. Yes, please. Tell us about Scotty Bucks and your reputation surrounding that currency. So, like, maybe people don't know about this, but, like, early on in Scotty's career, there was a currency that was completely created in his honor called Scotty Bucks. It had his face all over them. They looked like dollar bills. And I'll let Scotty fill you in on how you got one.
I think people that actually made them were worried about getting charged with counterfeiting, but they looked pretty.
They were beautiful.
They were very well made. Yeah, counterfeiting currency is a serious crime. Yeah, I think probably you should ask Matt Laz a little bit more about Scotty Bucks. I think he was the reserve chairman for a while. And yeah, I would say to any jumpers out there that, I did not have a lot of money ever really at all in my base jumping career. And, that seems to be one of the biggest limiting factors that kind of causes causes decision making, at least progression wise, to go certain ways. And I spent a lot of time on couches. I spent a lot of time sleeping in my car. And when you're traveling like that, it's good to at least be a good guest. Like, always leave people with a smile. Don't travel around the world and be a complete jerk, because that stuff chases up with you. So
or it eventually catches up with Squirrel, who had to issue currency on your behalf to repay some of the debts.
Yeah.
You went from being that guy on the couch to owning a couch. Like
I'm on it right now.
It's pretty sweet, man.
You vagrant base jumpers out there, you too can own a couch. Just that message out there for you. One day, if you save your pennies and do the right thing and live base jumping, you too can own a couch.
And until then, hopefully you're well liked enough that you can just crash on other people's, and those people will take fake currency that is worth 0.001 cents if you redeem them with Squirrel on your behalf, so that you can, take a shower and get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, I'd say more important lessons for living that kind of lifestyle: never turn down a shower and never turn down a hot meal when it's offered to you. 100%. Never do it.
Oh man, yeah, that's the truth. Okay, I love you, Scotty Bob. Thanks so much for coming on the show and giving your perspective. Hopefully, it's not the last time that we see you on here.
Hell yeah, look forward to it. Yeah, later, guys. Thanks a bunch.
Yeah, buddy. Much love. Much love.
Man, what a great conversation and a funny place to end. It's a reminder that I should pull out my Scotty Bucks. If anyone else is holding on to some currency, just remember that Squirrel is still redeeming those, I think, for 0.001 cents each. So they do have some market value. Lo, what did you think about that conversation?
Yeah, it definitely didn't disappoint. Always a good time chatting with Scotty. And, this is something that's really great about podcasting, is being able to sit down and have a focused conversation. And it didn't disappoint. He's come a long way. He's definitely a Scotty 2.0 in my mind. And it's really cool to see a close friend, make it through and open a different chapter in life. And he's really ready to give back. And I'm excited for where they're taking this course and where their school is going. And it was very informative.
Totally. And I'm glad that he's teaching now. And it's taken him a long time. His former self was just one that taught through hard lessons, telling people, the blunt and honest truth on the exit points. And now he's like kind of backed that up, and he's helping people before they get to the exit point doing stupid shit. And I'm really glad that he's taken that role in our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Also, this podcast is co-produced and edited by Mark Stockwell. See you on the next one.